This here is right in the front of the garden. That's the house back there. So you can see I'm standing in my street, and I practice no-dig gardening, and it's also called sheet mulching or lasagna gardening. So my native soil here at the Jersey Shore is very, very, very sandy. There's really not much structure to the soil at all. The pro is that it's super easy to dig into the soil, but the con is that there's not much nutrients. It drains really fast, so it dries out really fast. So mulch is really important when you're gardening in sandy soil because it helps to retain moisture, and so you don't have to water all that often. And then it also breaks down, organic mulch breaks down and actually builds soil. So it feeds the worms, it calls worms to the garden. I know that if I dig straight into this sand, I won't find a single worm. But once I started layering all of this compost and mulch and wood chips on top of the yard, and now I dig and there are worms under there and little critters that are eating the organic matter and producing waste and feeding the microorganisms, which make nutrients bioavailable to the plants and make the plants really happy. So that's my goal, is to keep layering on organic matter and to build soil in this very sandy yard. In order to do that, I have to contain this mulch because it is a front yard and I do want it to look fairly neat and nice, and I want my neighbors to like it too because I love it. So what I use is logs around my garden beds. You can see that my yard is sloped, so I'm kind of on a hill. If I go over here, you can see how that happens. So the water naturally wants to run down the hill. So what I do is I kind of terrace my gardens by putting these logs on the front side, the downhill side, and then there are no logs on the uphill side of the slope. That allows me to make my gardens fairly flat and level. So a couple of things that I have planted here. You can see this shrub right here in front of me, and there's one behind it back there. Those are called Nanking cherry bushes. They have a very similar habit to a forsythia bush, which is a very popular landscaping shrub. It blooms in very early spring with those bright yellow flowers. What happens with a Nanking cherry is very much the same. They bloom in very early spring, just the same time the forsythia blooms, but the flowers are small and white. It's very ornamental, and it's a fast-growing hedgerow style of a shrub. Gets to be about the same size as a forsythia bush too, so it can grow very tall. These are young. All the things in my garden are very young. We just moved here 3 years ago, and I started planting almost immediately. So again, the soil is sandy and not very nutrient rich, so it's taken some time for these plants to really catch on and take off. This is really the year that the Nanking cherries are coming into their own. They struggled the first couple of years, but now there's a lot of new growth on top, and they are just going to jump out of the ground. And I assume I'm probably going to have to give them little haircuts along the season to keep them nice and bushy. Each time you cut one of these stems, probably 2 new stems will come out of it, come out of the branch. So that keeps the bushes nice and bushy and they don't get too long and leggy. That's really the kind of look I'm looking for. At some point, I'll probably let it do its thing and stop trimming it, but I'd like to keep it nice and bushy because I like that look. There are cherries happening really close to the stems in these 2 shrubs. Because they did flower and they did set fruit. So I'm really happy about that. And I don't think the birds are really going to bother them because they are dense. The foliage is really dense. And I don't think that the birds will see them very well, those cherries. Let's see, what else do we have? I have 3 beach plums in this yard. So that's the newest one. That was just planted last season. But here is another. And here is another one. And beach plums have very different habits. Usually they're spreading. They are native to this area of New Jersey, so I know they're going to do really well here. They thrive in sandy, dry, low nutrient soil, so they're going to be just fine. They produce small plums. I think they're delicious. They taste like plums, only they're really tiny. They are like the size of a big fat cherry, and they are great food for wildlife, but they're also good food for Jersey Shore Lisa. I like them a lot. So I can't wait for them to start producing. I assume I'm going to get plums this year because they just finished flowering. You can kind of see how that happened, and now they're going to set fruit, hopefully. Along with the food that I have planted in the front yard, I also have some ornamentals. So these iris are just about to open up. And here is a big patch of bee balm, which the hummingbirds just adore, and the butterflies love it too. So they remind me, the flowers of bee balm remind me of little troll dolls because of the hair on the troll dolls. These flowers are bright fuchsia, and they're so pretty. Over there, that is a raspberry that's brand new this season. There's another raspberry. And here is a peony that's just about to bloom. You can see this big mat of strawberries that are really happy, and they are flowering like crazy. And there's big berries on there that are just doing their thing, and they're gonna turn red soon. We've had so much rain in the last few days, so all this stuff is so happy because of the rain. This shrub, I almost took it out last year because I just didn't think it was doing well, and it had an ugly shape, but it is coming into its own. Look how pretty these flowers are. This is called a high bush cranberry, and they are self-fertile, but I actually have 3 of them in the yard because I thought that it was such a cool idea. They are not like the traditional American cranberries that grow very low down to the ground, and they are evergreen and they like boggy areas. A high bush cranberry produces berries that taste a lot like the American cranberry. So, but they are not the same at all as far as the plant goes. This is a brand new bed that I just put in a week ago. The 2 things that are planted in there right now are a brand new apricot and a buffalo berry, which is a shrub, and that will produce small, edible, I don't think they're really delicious according to what I've read, berries, but it is a nitrogen fixing shrub, which means it takes the nitrogen from the air and puts it down into its roots and shares it with the plants and soil around it. So it's basically like living fertilizer, and it really is a support species for the plants that are around it. So even if I don't love how buffalo berries taste, I think it's important to have it in the yard. These 2 trees in this bed, I just planted these last year. These are 2 apple trees, and I'm really happy to have them here. One is a Honey Crisp and one is a Golden Delicious. I planted some yarrow this season. This here is a black aronia berry, and that will produce edible berries. They also call them choke berries because supposedly they're pretty gross until they're super, super ripe, which happens in late fall. So I have had black aronia berry jam, and it's delicious. So I am not scared. I know that it's going to be really good. I just have to be patient and wait for it to be ripe. And hopefully I get them before the birds do. Over here I have 2 elderberries. So there's the smaller one. There is the bigger one. And they are both doing really well and really happy this season. Like I said, this is a new garden. It's only in its 3rd year, and these things are finally taking off. And they are going to be large fountain-shaped shrubs. They get to be about 12 to 14 feet tall and wide, and they will be covered in these gorgeous white umbrella-shaped bunches of flowers. When those flowers bloom in midsummer, they smell fantastic, and they will make the whole block smell fantastic. And then the flowers fall, they develop small black bunches of berries. When they are ripe, I will pick those and I will get a garbage bag full of berries per bush. And you can make those into elderberry syrup, which is super good for your immune system. Or you can make them into wine, or you can make them into juice, or whatever you want to do. You can bake them into baked goods. Better to eat them after you've cooked them. That's why syrup and wine are, the fermentation process is kind of the same action. If you eat too many raw elderberries, you'll get sick to your stomach, so don't do that. I do not recommend it. This is a pear tree. It's a kaffir pear tree. There are strawberries planted below it. I practice permaculture in my yard, so you might think that some things are planted too close together. I am trying to develop a food forest here. So a food forest is planted in layers, like a traditional forest. A natural forest grows in layers. You have your canopy trees, your high trees. You have understory trees, which are slightly lower and don't need as much sun exposure. Then you have a shrub layer, and then you have a ground cover layer, and you have root crops, and you have vining crops. So I try to use all that available space to grow the things I'd like to grow and have the productivity and natural processes that happen within a forest system. So that's why I have this comfrey plant planted right below this pear tree, and the ground cover of the strawberries below that, because those strawberries help to shade the soil and retain the moisture for the pear. The comfrey is right here, and it's blooming like crazy right now, and the pollinators just love it. The bees love the comfrey. Comfrey has a super deep taproot. It's a perennial, and it reaches down far into the subsoil to mine nutrients that are way down deep. It brings those nutrients up into its leaves, and it shares it with the end roots, and it shares it with the plants that surround it. Comfrey has a lot of foliage, so after it's done blooming, I plan to chop it down to the ground and spread all that foliage around the garden as mulch, and then it will come back with more foliage and more flowers. So this helps to take those nutrients from down deep in the soil and share them with the things I've planted up on the surface that could really use the nutrients because of our sand. Here is another pear tree, and that's very close to the elderberry, but they're doing okay. They are sharing that space beautifully. This is a yastaberry. Yastaberry is a cross between a blackcurrant and a gooseberry, and it's in the ribe family, and it is really happy and doing really well here. They have edible berries that are just delicious, and so they're easy to grow here in New Jersey. This is a rhubarb plant, and that looks just as beautiful as an elephant ear or a hosta, and it's really small. I just put it in last year in the beginning of the season, so it's really coming up very nicely, but it'll double in size when it's real mature and big and happy. So they are really ornamental and striking plants to put in the landscape. There's another comfrey plant, and that is planted beside a pawpaw tree. A pawpaw tree is native to this area of the United States, the Northeast, and they are the closest relative that's native to this area to a banana. Supposedly, they taste like banana vanilla custard. I haven't had one yet, but I've had these trees for quite some time. I actually moved them from my old property. I have 3 of them here. So this one flowered this year for the first time, and I am so excited. Maybe next year will be the year that I get to taste a pawpaw. I also have some, I've just been planting out some of the tomatoes. So there's a little tomato. That one's doing okay. I also have some blueberries in this bed and some sorrel planted here this year. That's called blood dock sorrel because of the beautiful red veins that are in those leaves. Those are very small right now because they're babies, but it's a perennial vegetable, and that will come back every year, and they are greens that I can add to soups and sauces and salads. Supposedly sorrel has a sour flavor to it, so it's not your mainstay. It's not a replacement for lettuce, but it is edible, and it is a delicacy in French cooking. These are lingonberries, and lingonberries are a close relative to cranberries. They like acidic soil, just like cranberries and blueberries do. They are evergreen. They are a low-growing, spreading ground cover. So that's what those are. Here's some more comfrey. And the blueberries are happening. There's berries on that bush right now. And they are done flowering, but there's still some flowers hanging on, and the bees just love them. Here is a red currant, and on this trellis there will be cucumbers climbing all over it this summer. So I've planted out those baby cucumber plants down the bottom next to some peas, and they will get going very shortly once the weather really starts to warm. You can see these little tufts of onions coming up in this bed, and these are called Egyptian walking onions. They are further along over here in this container. These are a perennial onion. They're bunching onions, and what happens during the growing season is this strange looking little bit here starts low on the onion, and it creeps up. You can see it's creeping up, and it'll end up at the top. I don't even know how it happens, but it does. It's so bizarre. And up at the top, it'll open up, and it will reveal a bunch of little bulbits, they're called. And they are tiny little onions that appear up at the top of the onion. And they get big and heavy, and they flop over and root themselves, and that's why they're called walking onions, because they're consistently creating new plants next to them and nearby, and they just kind of walk out of wherever you've planted them. But I come out and I take those bulbits off, and then I spread them around, because it's always good to have onions growing on hand. You never want for onions. This is a gooseberry, and the gooseberry is super productive, and already it's mid-May and it's done blooming, and all these berries are all over it, and they are just so delicious. I love them so much. When they're ripe, they get like a reddish tint to them, and they're so juicy, and they're kind of a little sour, but they're sweet too. I dig them. And then over here is another pawpaw, and that's doing really well. It's very happy. This is a brand new white currant, and right now it's just a stick, but there's some green coming out of it, and it's gonna do well. I know it is. All along these pilings here that I have laying down, you can see I've planted out a few tomatoes, and I'll stake those. Those are toward the back of the yard, but you can see that I've planted tomatoes in my front yard. I'm not afraid of it. Now I am in a fairly, I would say, it's not the closest, tightest, packed suburban neighborhood. I think that my neighbors are amazing, and they get a kick out of me gardening in my front yard like this. But as you saw, I plant a lot of flowers and ornamental things closer to the street for the curb appeal of it. But I think that gives me some leverage to be able to take some license and put some tomatoes back here, especially if I share with my neighbors. They tend to like getting some tomatoes in the summertime. Back here against the fence, because the fence is kind of a windbreak and I can use it for support if I need to, I have Jerusalem artichokes. Jerusalem artichokes are in the sunflower family, actually, and they get real tall. They get about 10 to 12 feet tall if they're real happy. Last year I had quite a lot in this area, and the voles attacked them and ate those tubers and took them down, and one after another they all fell. So that's why I've buried these 3 pots here, and I've replanted some Jerusalem artichokes in those pots. But even though they took down all my plants last year, you can see some of the Jerusalem artichokes have escaped and they're coming back. That's because with even just a tiny little knob of root, if it's left in the soil, they will come back. Once you've planted Jerusalem artichokes, they're not easy to get rid of if you ever want to get rid of them for one reason or another. But keep in mind, they are very tall, and so don't plant them in the front of a garden bed if you want to be able to see anything behind them, because they come up and they get beautiful yellow, sunshiny flowers all over them in the fall, and they smell like chocolate, the flowers. They are just terrific to have in the yard. But just plant them in the back. And then I also have a couple of mammoth sunflowers there in between, because I've never actually successfully grown sunflowers and I wanted to give it another try. So I planted them right up against the fence, and we'll see how it goes. This is the backyard here. There are some blackberries there, and there's my greenhouse, and I'll take you for a tour through my greenhouse in another video. All the way there across the yard, we have a keyhole garden bed, which has some food planted in it. But I just wanted to give you all a little tour of my front yard garden at MyNJGarden.com. I have a blog where I record all my growing adventures, but I haven't updated it very often. So here is a spring update with visuals. If you have any questions about any of the plants that I've described in these gardens, please leave it in the comments and subscribe to the channel. That would be great. I would love to keep sharing my my progress in my NJ Garden with you, and check out the blog and look at some of the posts. I've been growing for a long time. I started gardening seriously in 2010, so there's lots of posts over there about my successes and my failures. Oh, the last thing I wanted to show you here is my bonfire peach tree. Bonfire peaches, it's a very small tree. It's not even, I'd say maybe 4 feet high, but there are peaches on there. That flowers very early in the spring, and it has beautiful pink flowers when it does, and then it gets these super dark red leaves on it. So anybody who plants like the Japanese maples as an ornamental tree because you love the way it looks, these guys are beautiful and can kind of fill that same space in the garden as far as being a small ornamental tree with red leaves, really striking, and yet it will also give you fruit. So thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Have a great day and go out and plant some food. Bye-bye.